and welcome to Scare You to Sleep. I'm your host, Shelby Novak, and I'm going to read you some true, terrifying tales sent in by your fellow listeners. It's raining here in LA, and before we begin, I wanted to say I hear you about the sound in last week's episode. I will begin to rein myself in with the sounds, especially starting next week. I really like what I did, and I stand by it, but I also understand and accept your critiques. And I'm talking about last week's episode titled Tap, Tap, Tap. What does all that have to do with the rain? I have no idea. I do want to tell you, though, that next week you'll be getting a supersized episode. I am finally doing a narration of the very well-loved horror story, The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. The narration alone is over 2 hours long, and I promise the sound and music will not be intrusive, but will be very immersive. Okay, now that little message is out there, let's get scared to sleep together by these listener stories. Our first is quite the doozy from Emily. Hi, Shelby. When I was about 13 years old, my family and I stopped at a family friend's home in Georgia for the night during one of our summer road trips. The couple had purchased a gorgeous Greek Revival home built in the early 1900s. Its grandeur immediately impressed upon you with its regal white columns and large wraparound porch. It felt like you were visiting Tara and Gone with the Wind. I'm in love with history, and being able to explore old buildings or homes is one of my greatest pleasures in life. I couldn't wait to look in every room and see what remnants of the past were still present for me to obsess over. My excitement was thwarted when the couple showed me where I would sleep that night. The wife, who we can call Linda, had an affinity for old dolls, and the upstairs room they had chosen for me to sleep in was filled with them. Porcelain bodies with glass eyes monopolized every inch of shelf space. My dad even laughed out loud when we walked in because it was one of the creepiest rooms he'd ever seen. I gave my parents a very telling stare, and they knew other accommodations would need to be made. My dad said he would sleep in the doll room, and I could sleep with my mom and little brother. Their room was downstairs and looked out onto the gorgeous wraparound porch. I was relieved, to say the least. After we had settled in, Linda told us she had prepared dinner in the formal dining room. She ushered us into the room while explaining how they had just finished restoring the original molding and wainscoting. I was in heaven. Through dinner, she informed us about the history of the house, and I was all ears. It was built in the early 1900s. For full disclosure, while writing this, I looked up the exact date when the house was built, and it was 1906. In the 30s, it was turned into a bed and breakfast, and then in the 40s, it became a private medical clinic. In the 50s, it transitioned into a full-fledged hospital until about 1960 or so, when it was turned back into a private residence. It passed through a few owners until Linda and her husband bought it in the early 2000s. They purchased it with the intent of restoring it to its original glory. She told us that overall everything had gone well, except for the incident that happened about a year before our visit. I remember her face suddenly became pale, and she had a haunted look in her eyes. She proceeded to tell us about one evening when they had some guests over for a dinner party. Everyone was in the dining room, just as we were then, enjoying a lovely meal, when suddenly the whole house shook like a bomb had gone off somewhere. Naturally, they were all in shock, wondering what had just happened. Linda's husband told everyone to stay in the dining room while he went to inspect the situation. What he found was an absolute tragedy. Their house sat up on a hill, and the 2-lane country road that went by the front of the house took a sharp turn just as you got to their driveway. If you weren't careful, you might mistake their driveway for the road. This is exactly what two drunk teenage boys had done and had consequently drove their car under the porch and into the house. Linda's husband screamed for her to call 911. She rang the police and ran outside with her cell phone in hand to see if she could help whoever was now trapped under the house. She and her husband were able to get to the driver's side door, and what they saw was unimaginable. The boy in the passenger seat had immediately been decapitated upon impact. The driver was mangled but somehow still alive, and when he saw Linda approach, he reached out to her. She stayed on the phone with 911 and held the boy's hand while waiting for the ambulance to arrive. Unfortunately, there was no one to save, as the driver passed away only moments later. Linda held his hand the whole time. My family and I were in shock hearing this story, heartbroken and mesmerized by the horror of it all at the same time. We asked 100 questions, as anyone would have, in an effort to fully process that this had really happened to them. My mom asked how they had been doing, if they had been coping all right. They said it had been a slow process, but the trauma was starting to fade. Linda concluded by saying that the image of those two boys, torn apart, would be forever imprinted in her mind. It was just about then that my dad realized how this story might scare the living daylights out of me and my brother. As I mentioned, I was about 13, so my brother would have been about 8. The conversation was quickly changed to a much lighter topic. We were going to see an antique car show the next day, and my brother was immediately distracted by his excitement. I, however, could not stop thinking about the dead boys. We finished up dinner, said our goodnights, and started to depart to our respective rooms. My mom and I wished my dad good luck with all his new friends, chuckling while we thought about him surrounded by all those creepy Victorian dolls. Our room was very cozy. There was a queen bed for me and my mom, and a twin bed for my brother. I don't remember the specifics about getting ready for bed that night, but I remember every single detail of what happened next. The queen bed was positioned right next to the door to the room. I was on the side closest to the door so that my mom could easily tend to my brother if needed. I mentioned early on that it was summer, and in Georgia, that meant thick, hot air at night. We kept the door to the room cracked to try and facilitate some airflow. I remember being able to see the red carpet runner in the hallway as I fell asleep. Hours of slumber passed without incident. That is, until shortly after midnight, I was awakened by the feeling of ice-cold air, a far cry from the swampy heat we had gone to bed with. It didn't feel like a breeze had come into the room, more like a sudden and all-encompassing atmospheric vortex. The air was crisp and still. It seemed like any natural sound had been muted, as if I were wearing noise-canceling headphones. Before I opened my eyes, I had a visceral feeling of terror. I could sense that my mom was still fast asleep next to me, but knowing she was only inches away didn't calm my fear. I grasped the sheets tightly and attempted to peek my eyes open. It was dark, but I could easily see the vibrant red carpet in the hallway. Nothing seemed out of place or unusual until a moment later, when a presence traveled down the hall. When I say presence, it wasn't an obvious ghostly shape or a distinct orb of light. It was more like a ripple through space. I had never seen anything like it in my life. As it passed the door to our room, I felt this overwhelming feeling of despair. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The craziest thing is that my brother woke up seconds later and said, "Mama, I'm hot." And he was right. Just like that, the steamy summer air was back. My skin, however, was still ice cold to the touch. Neither my mom or my brother saw, heard, or felt anything that I had. Maybe it's because I was closest to the door? I'll never know. But they all laughed and brushed it off when I told them about it the next day. I have no idea what I saw that night. Any storied house might have a few straggling spirits poking around, but a house that had seen an abundance of death and tragedy likely has something more sinister lurking. I know what I experienced was otherworldly. I felt it in my bones. The one thing I'm grateful for is that I didn't see one of those Victorian dolls walking down the hall. I don't think I would have survived that. What do you think it might have been? Thank you for reading my story, Shelby. Scare You to Sleep was one of the first podcasts I ever listened to many years ago, and you've been a part of my bedtime ritual ever since. Love, Emily. Thank you so much, Emily, and I know you've been a listener for a long time. I was excited to see you send in a story, and wow, one thing that's been interesting about starting this true horror series, I was thinking about this when I was compiling this episode, is the patterns I've started seeing in some of these stories from people from all over the world and different walks of life, and one of them being, in your story, the idea or the fact that the sound was gone from the room. We've heard that several times on the show, someone experiencing something and the sound going away from the world. And I've told you all many times on the show that I've had that same thing happen to me. I've had an experience where all the sound went away and I was in the forest. And that's the thing. We've had it happen to people out in nature or inside buildings, and it's such a strange, specific phenomenon. And the thing you saw, that ripple of space, is very interesting. I can almost picture it. Not that I've seen anything like it personally, but I feel like I understand what you're describing. And that is really interesting. And what an interesting and tragic story for this house. And, when you mentioned at the end, actually after the story about the teenage boys, I'd almost forgotten that the house had been a sort of hospital in different iterations over the years. And when you mentioned that it'd seen so much tragedy, like that's something I feel like energy can implant itself places or just leave an imprint. And that house was definitely one of those places, it seems. Thank you again, Emily, for your story. Our next story comes from Maya. Hey Shelby, new listener, but love that you take stories from everyday people to read. It's always good to feel like you aren't alone in weird things that happen to you. My story comes from my first apartment. I had moved out on my own for the first time, and everything started one night when getting home from work. I was working the night shift, so routinely got home late and tired, and nothing weird had happened until that night. When I came in, everything electronic was off, like everything. Anything that was plugged into a wall, down to my washer and dryer, was unplugged. TV, Xbox, microwave, phone charger, crock pot that had been cooking, everything. I plugged everything back in and felt like somebody in maintenance had to be screwing with me. My internet router was fried though. It would not work and did not work for the rest of my time living there. Fast forward to a few nights later, I had been sleeping very little. One night after work, I was sleeping in bed. My bed in this small apartment had my back facing the door of my bedroom, which led to a staircase directly down to the front door on the lower level. As I laid there, half asleep, I felt someone suddenly put their hand square in the middle of my back and holding me down forcefully. My legs would not respond, and laying on my side facing the wall, I could see nothing but my wall as I tried to force myself against the hand. I could hear heavy breathing behind me as well, like whoever it was could hardly gather a deep breath. Beginning to feel like this was my end, I suddenly felt the hand disappear from my back and footsteps sprinting down the staircase to the front door. I jumped up, but realized I had never heard the door open or close. I ran to the staircase and saw nothing but the locked front door down in the darkness. Needless to say, I did not sleep anymore that night, and moved shortly after. It was over a year later that I found out what sleep paralysis was, and I would chalk it up to that. But when this happened to me, I could move somewhat, and the electronics in my apartment was too weird. I don't believe in ghosts per se, but I do believe there are weird things in this world. Thanks for taking the time to read. Sometimes it still haunts me to this day. Okay, I could totally be off the mark here, but my brain, when reading this story, immediately went to our old friend, frogging. That's right, for those of you who don't know, frogging is when someone lives in your dwelling, house, apartment, whatever, and you're not aware of it. Okay, and you know better than I do, Maya. Like, you lived there, and so I could be totally off the mark, but I just thought of all the electronics and your router being fried, that someone living there maybe, did some sort of power surge by plugging in something, or, just sometimes there are power surges. Sometimes you flip a breaker or whatever. That happens. It somehow fries your router. Maybe even maybe even your router started smoking. I don't know. So they freak out, go around, unplug everything, hoping not to start a fire. And then you come home and everything's still unplugged. And that, then also the sensation, because what you described doesn't sound exactly like any sleep paralysis I've experienced. Like, whenever I've gotten it, your body is paralyzed. You can't move at all. And I never felt a sensation that, like, you said you felt a hand on your back. And that's really interesting to me. Like, someone was actually there. And I only think frogging because you said that the front door was still locked and someone was running out, but they didn't actually leave, obviously. And is there any way, I would love to know, is there any way there could have been a different room? Was it an older building? Was there an attic that there was maybe access to? Or maybe there was an attic you didn't know you had access to within your apartment? I don't know. That's where my brain went. But, who knows? It could be a multitude of things, but that's still terrifying. That's so scary. I'm so glad you moved pretty quickly after that, and I'm so glad that you're okay. Okay, this next story is one of the funniest ghost stories that I've heard, and it came with photographic evidence, which I will post on social media. This comes from Justine. Hey Shelby, longtime listener, and I love the True Stories episodes. While I can't say this is a very scary one, more of a silly, spooky story that me nor my roommates can explain. Inside our 1930s house, we have a mudroom with a wall covered in sports equipment or games, lovingly called the sports wall. With these items, there is a plaque photo of race car driver Jeff Gordon. This was purchased at Goodwill. One day, the foosball shelf holding the photo falls to the ground and breaks. We left the photo with the foosball parts just for the day. When the next night, I noticed on the coffee table that there was the photo of Jeff Gordon being surrounded by 3 candles. Obviously thinking one of the roommates did it, I asked both, and both had the same answer of, "What?" Confused, we laugh it off and say we like the shrine and leave it there for the night. The next night, I again walk by the coffee table, look at the shrine, and see Jeff Gordon is missing. Laughing, I say out loud to my roommates, "Oh, who moved Jeff Gordon?" And getting the same reply again, "What?" We begin to search all over the living room, under the table, and even under the couch because we have 2 cats. While my roommate was still on the ground, I hear, "Oh my God," and see her pointing up. Looking up, I see the picture of Jeff Gordon on the ceiling, staring down at us. I felt directly in a Paranormal Activity movie, just waiting for the photo to slam to the ground or something, and really awoken that fear when I saw that movie at 14. The part that's so spooky is that we have very high ceilings, which anyone would need a chair or a step table or even long arms to put it up there or get it down. We even had to use a spatula to reach the photo and peel it off. It had 2 command strips, which had us immediately jumping to someone pranking us and calling the last person who was in the house besides us, and met with more "What?" This was followed by us putting Jeff Gordon in a salt circle for the night, where he did not move from, and continuing telling us that it's gotta be a prank. I find it so funny because Jeff Gordon is alive as of right now, January 15th, 2025, and we've already joked about the dirt basement we have being haunted, so unsure if connected, but I'm choosing to believe it's not. Hope this gives you a laugh, and I'll include the photo to show how truly insane the moment seeing the photo was. Keep up the awesome work, and don't get haunted by an alive race car driver. Thank you so much for this one, Justine, and yes, they did send in the photo, and I will post it on social media, and it cracked me up to no end. I'm pulling it up right now because I have to look at it one more time. Yeah, and for those who maybe don't have social media, it's a plaque with Jeff Gordon's face on it, stuck to a ceiling next to a ceiling fan. It's pretty hilarious, and again, check that out on social media if you so choose. Thank you so much, Justine. This next story is from Deb. Hello, just want to start by saying your voice is now a constant companion for my long, boring night shifts. Thank you for the work that you do. I love you. Thank you. This story is one of 2 very strange incidents in my life. I cannot objectively say they are paranormal, but I am 100% sure they were not normal. This story might be a little long. Really sorry. True story. My friend at the end of the corridor. This story is from 2007, and I was 13 years old. My father worked for a government-funded oil corp, and one of his many field transfers during his time there was in a small town in Assam in the eastern edges of the Himalayan mountain ranges. It wasn't even a town in the true sense, just a railway junction, a wide, misty valley surrounded by distant blue hills and heavy vegetation. The area was a hotbed of militant activity, so corps and other entities owned by the government were built with heavy fortification. And so these institutions would establish colonies, kind of like a modern mining town. It was a sprawling, fancy little oasis in the middle of nowhere. Employees would be transferred to this place from all parts of the country for a period of 3 to 5 years, and most of them would bring their families during their service. It was a large place that had everything: a stadium, a clinic, 4 different courts for 4 different court-based games, 1 school and a kindergarten, 3 separate clusters of apartment blocks for the different classes of officers, and had long, dark roads flanked by thick vegetation and tall trees in between the different sections of the colony. It was built during a time when the country was under Soviet influence, and the brutalist-style buildings nestled within the velvety dark green of the flora still invokes a feeling of pure yearning. I used to be terrified of the place during my first year, but 3 years later, I was falling apart at the thought of never seeing this place again. It was the night of Diwali, a Hindu festival of lights, but in the eastern parts of South Asia, this day is celebrated for the goddess Kali, the deity of destruction and apocalypse. We light lamps, candles, crackers, string lights, and all that, so we can aid the goddess in her efforts to banish evil. Honestly, different parts have different versions of the lore. It is a popular festival, and it is always set on a new moon night. We call that day Amavasya. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. Colonies make a big deal over festivals, especially those in the autumn-winter season. We were 45 minutes away from the town/junction and only had another government colony and a sparse village for company. People did what they could to make it memorable. We're talking sports meets, picnics, costume competition, fireworks festival, raffle, feasting, drinking, anything you can think of. As per general Diwali tradition, All the roads running through the colony were covered in canopies of string lights, a welcome change from the dim, dreary sodium vapor lamps that would struggle against the darkness of winter. While the adults would be huddled in and around the clubhouse and open-air theater, their kids, bored to death in the middle of nowhere, would try to get into the places we weren't allowed in. Trying to get into the power station or the office quarters, for example. It was extremely common to brag about such an adventure with lots of garnishing. It was Diwali, and festivities were fully underway. I was turning out to be a pick-me girl and marinated with the wrong crowd and went along with their crappy choices. On that day, when the neighborhood was celebrating, we decided to break into the school at around 9 p.m.-ish. It was late, and the school was locked up for the holiday season, and it was dark. The boy who proposed the plan was a student at the school and wanted to show us around. We called him Monty. Looking back, I think Monty had some specific goals in mind. It was very easy to climb over the gate and get inside the large compound. The school was very different from the Catholic convent school that I was going to. My school was outside the colony. And I remember being kind of starstruck. This place was like the American schools from the movies. Lots of open spaces with a cool atrium and another outdoor space full of stuff. My school was like a nunnery compared to this. The ground floor corridor was dark, but the classrooms had big windows that let in all the festival lights. The rooms were latched but not locked. I remembered this rather well. The sweet, ambient glow, paired with glittering dust motes and the distant upbeat sounds of the festivities. I lost track of the others while looking at all the Christmas arts and crafts submissions. I remember Monty making a beeline to the upper floor and did not show us around. Then, I heard him screaming. It was loud, and I could tell he was barreling down the corridor on the floor above. As I stepped out onto the corridor from the classroom on the ground floor, I saw him fall down the stairs very roughly. He scrambled to his feet to run past me as fast as he could. Being the attention seeker that I was, I put on a brave face and walked up to the foot of the stairs. That's when I heard a loud thumping noise. It sounded like a heavy kick drum, but also like running. It was making its way to the landing above me, and fast. I turned and ran. I remember hearing the thumping noise rushing down another flight of stairs, and then stop. It was quiet. I was already out in the open compound and aiming for the gate. But something happened to me, and I stopped and looked back. He was at the base of the stairs, just standing and staring. I was quite far, and it was dark, but enough light for me to see that it was just Monty. It couldn't be him because he pushed me out of the way as he was running past me in the other direction. And at that moment, I could clearly hear him trying to scramble up the gate in plain sight. I followed them out. The whole thing was over in 20 minutes max. We were trying to catch our breath and trying to explain what each of us saw, but unfortunately, I don't remember all the stories other than the fact that all 6 of us claimed to have witnessed something. I was so caught up replaying what I saw in my head. When I was a little stable, I looked at Monty and asked him if he had a brother. I cannot explain how he looked at me. It was accusatory in retrospect. He never spoke to us again. I don't remember him as a good person, so maybe it was a setup gone wrong. I am inclined to think so. We lived in the same neighborhood, and I didn't know he had a brother, but I didn't know him that well. He used to try to hurt the birds. He used to misgender me because I was a tall kid, and I feel like he wanted to get me in trouble or just scare me so he'd have one more reason to be mean. Hope you enjoyed. Lots of love from Dev. If you're curious about the location, I don't live there anymore, and it is a satellite corporation town where employees and their families from all parts of the country are transferred to and from every 3 years. I lived there from 2007 to 2009. What I mean is, that place is nobody's home. No one grew up there long enough to call it that. Thank you so much, Deb, and I am going to check out that link you sent me. I'll post that link as well, along with the Jeff Gordon picture. Everyone's giving extra credit this episode. And Deb, you're a fantastic writer, by the way. You really painted a picture, and I've never heard of a town like this. And it honestly sounds like an incredible setting for a horror movie. Am I right? Thank you for that story. And yeah, that's terrifying because it did kind of sound like they were setting you guys up for who knows what. I'm just glad that you're okay. And thank you again so much for that incredible story and for everything, for the link and for everything. Again, please look into writing some more, maybe fiction stuff. I don't know. Set a horror story in that place you grew up, or not, you didn't grow up. You just literally told me you didn't grow up there, but that you were there, you were in for a few years, because it's very fascinating. These next stories are from Ariel. Hi, Shelby, and anyone who might be listening. Hope all is well. I wanted to share a couple of stories that happened to me when I was younger in my childhood home. We moved into the suburbs surrounding the Dallas area in 2007, and this was the first home my parents were able to buy, so it was an exciting time for us. The house wasn't old, I want to say about 5 years with 2 previous owners, and it was quite large, 2 stories, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms. There was no mention of anything strange or any deaths in the home, but we quickly realized there was definitely some kind of spiritual entity living there. I had only had a couple of minor paranormal experiences prior to moving into the house, to which I just chalked up to me being young and imaginative. But this house truly made me believe in the paranormal. There were a lot of strange things that happened over the course of the next 10 years of me living there. Most of it was pretty standard residual haunting things, but there are a couple moments that really stood out to me and will always leave me wondering. So here they are. I will say, I never felt like this entity was dangerous or malevolent in any way, but creepy nonetheless. Story 1. I was 9 when we moved into the house, and this takes place just a couple of months after we moved in. It was about 3 a.m. and I was wide awake, watching cartoons in our TV room upstairs, when suddenly I heard what sounded like feet shuffling across carpet coming from downstairs. My parents' room was the only one downstairs, so I assumed one of them was up and walking to the kitchen. My little sister was only 1 at the time, and she slept in their room, so I thought they were getting up to get her a bottle or something. After a couple of minutes of hearing footsteps downstairs, I finally decided to get up to check it out. I walk over to the railing of the stairs and looked straight down, and I see a large, shadowy figure walking from the hallway that leads to my parents' room to the kitchen. I began to call out to my parents, hoping it was one of them, but no answer. The figure is just pacing back and forth in that area right below me, not responding to any of my calls. I start to think that maybe I'm just sleepier than I thought, and I'm imagining things since it's a new house that is still pretty empty. I decide to go back to the couch and continue to watch TV, trying to ignore the footsteps. About half an hour later, I become aware of the footsteps again, so I go back to the stairs railing to look down. And there it is, the shadowy figure, still pacing back and forth. I'm so creeped out that I just decided to call it a night and go sleep in my room. The next morning, I asked my parents if they were awake or walking around at any point of the night, and they said they were all sound asleep all night. I still don't know if my eyes and ears were playing tricks on me that night, but this was the first experience I had in that house that convinced me that we were not alone. Story 2. This story didn't necessarily happen to me, but this was probably the weirdest and most unexplainable thing to ever happen in this house. I think I was about 14 at the time, and it was a nice weekend, so my mom, my sister, and I decided to go to Six Flags. We lived just a few minutes away, so we had season passes and would go quite often, mostly when my dad was traveling for work, since he didn't really like theme parks and never cared to go. During this time, my uncle was living with us in one of the spare bedrooms upstairs. He was at work, the three of us are getting ready to leave for the park, and my dad is out of town. As we were getting ready to go, we heard a bang come from upstairs. We had a cat at the time, so we just assumed she had gotten into something, and we continued on and left to the park. Several hours later, we're still at the park, just walking around, when my mom gets a phone call from my uncle. He is super upset, asking if my sister and I were playing in his room. My mom knew that we never went into his room unless he was there, plus we had been at the park all day, so she tells him no one has been in his room. He said that his room looked like it had been ransacked. His movies and games were all thrown off the shelf and scattered everywhere. The blankets on his bed were thrown on the floor, and his laptop was tossed underneath his desk. He said that there was no signs of forced entry, nothing was stolen, and our house alarm wasn't going off. We told him about the bang we heard, but that we thought it was just the cat. He hung up and wasn't too happy, of course, but he also knew my sister and I wouldn't do something like that. So he was more confused than anything. A few weeks later, it's the middle of the week, so everyone is at work/school, but my uncle was off and at home that day. He said that while he was showering, he heard a bang. He thought it might be the front door, which was a bit weird because no one should be home yet, but maybe something had happened. He got out of the shower and went into his room, only to find it ransacked again. The exact same thing. His movies and games scattered, blankets on the floor, and laptop under the desk. And again, no sign of a break-in or anything stolen. This strange occurrence only happened these 2 times, but no one could come up with any logical explanation as to what happened. Guess our ghost just didn't like him. That's all I have for now. But there are a lot more stories that come from this house. We frequently had friends and family staying or visiting, and almost every person who has stayed there has said they experienced something weird. So I know it wasn't just me. My dad still lives in that house, but when I go back and visit, I don't get the same feeling of something being here or experience anything anymore. I guess whatever it was has moved on, or attached itself to one of our guests at one point. Thanks for reading. Thank you so much, Ariel. That was fascinating. Your poor uncle, just getting bullied by a ghost. Imagine being bullied by a ghost. It's never, that sounds no fun. I mean, you don't even get the fun story of being like, oh, I saw an apparition. It's just like, he's just fucking up my shit, man. And your story, though, that was terrifying. Picturing you, looking over the railing and just seeing a dark figure pacing back and forth. That's horrifying. It's so scary. Thank you so much for sharing these, because these were really good. I really appreciate these. Thank you, Ariel. Ariel? I don't know. You can let me know later. I'm so sorry. So we're coming to the end of the stories, and I wanted to end with this very short but very sweet ghost story from Danielle. Hi, Shelby. My story is pretty brief and not too spooky, so I totally get it if you decide not to include it in the podcast. My grandma passed away in May. I'm so sorry, Danielle. She was Korean, and even after living in rural Nebraska for over 50 years, she held on to a lot of her Korean traditions. Food was a big deal in her culture, and she never let my grandpa or anyone else skip a meal. The day after she passed, we were at her house sorting out funeral plans. We lost track of time, and around 11:30 or 12, a plastic piggy bank full of coins tumbled over in the living room. We all took it as a sign from Grandma Insun, reminding us it was lunchtime and we should eat. Thank you, Danielle. That was so precious. And thank you to all of those of you who've submitted a story to the show. I really appreciate you sharing these. Sometimes, I know it can be a little scary sharing these scary stories. And if you have a true story you'd like read on the show, I can't get to all of them, unfortunately. So if you have sent them, maybe even try sending them again. I don't mind. But you can send them to scareyoutosleep@gmail.com. Please mention that it is a non-fiction story in the subject line. I almost got them mixed up. And if you have a fictional story, send those my way as well. And you can send those to scareyoutosleep@gmail.com. Feel free to let me know if you need me to use a pseudonym or you want to remain anonymous. I do that frequently. Sometimes I don't mention it outright on here, but good 50-50 of you like to use pseudonyms or stay anonymous for these stories, and I completely understand. So I'm happy to do that as well. If you'd like to follow the show on social media, if you'd like to see this Jeff Gordon photo stuck to the ceiling, follow me at scareyoutosleep on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, all the stuff. I'm sure I missed one. There's so many now, right? On all the stuff, and I will post it. And you can follow me personally at Shelby B. Novak on all the same stuff. By the way, thank you so much to those of you. I know I did a little call to action that was so embarrassing to follow the show at Scary to Sleep on Instagram to help me get to 10,000 followers, because the world is dumb and people, unfortunately, follower counts is basically currency in this day and age. It's so dumb. I know how dumb it is, but I thoroughly appreciate how many of you went and followed, and I'm so close to 10,000 now. I'm less than 500 followers away from 10,000, and I really appreciate it. Again, I know how silly it is. I didn't create the system, but I got to play the game, and I really, really appreciate you going and following that account. It's again at Scary to Sleep on Instagram, if you so choose. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And what else? Oh, you can follow the show on Patreon, patreon.com/scarytosleep for ad-free episodes and bonus episodes. And I'm actually going to be working on some bonus stuff tomorrow. Tomorrow's Saturday. And I canceled plans so I can put in some more work. I have a lot of other projects that I've been brought into, which are very exciting. I'm so excited to share with you some of these other projects I'm working on. But so my last few weeks have been a little scrambled, but I am taking a full day to work on some bonus stuff for everyone. Very excited about that. And what else? I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like I'm missing one of these little announcements, and I don't know. Go follow the Bloody Disgusting podcast if you like me in a more casual setting. Kind of like these true story episodes. I'm a little more casual, except I'm using my louder speaking voice, and there's guests. It's not just me. But go follow the Bloody Disgusting podcast, and it's, again, thank you to those of you who have followed me over there. I read one of your emails. Zena is the one who gets the emails and the voicemails, and she was so excited. She was like, oh my God, one of your listeners from Scary to Sleep wrote to us and mentioned you, and we were very excited. So thank you for that. Thank you for those of you who have been following me over there as well. I'm just, I don't know, I'm feeling a little sentimental today about some stuff, and just seeing how I've grown over the past couple years after, being not held back in certain ways. And I'm, me, I get a little sappy sometimes, and today that's really coming up in waves, and I really appreciate all the support you've all given me. That's why I really wanted to put in the little apology in the beginning. Last week's episode, I know some of you really loved it, and then but I did notice on Spotify quite a few comments that said that the music was too loud for everyone, and I apologize. I think it was more distracting than loud, which is totally fair. I'm being pedantic because the levels were the same, so that's why I didn't notice. The levels were the same as always, but I think it was, again, I went a little hard on the sound effects. I get a little carried away. I have fun with it, and I want to paint a picture, and then I forget that, maybe some people don't like that. So I apologize for those of you who were kind of put off by the episode, but a lot of you really enjoyed it, and a lot of you really enjoyed the stories. So thank you to those too. I just like to take constructive criticism to heart, and I don't want to be like, well, if you don't like it, then go somewhere else. I don't like to do that. I have room to grow. I'm all self-taught in this audio production world. I'm all completely self-taught. I didn't go to any sort of schooling. So any little tips from you, the listener, I'm going to, some of it I won't implement if it's just one person being like, well, I don't like it when you say the word masticate, and so don't ever say it again. I actually had one like that. It was years ago. I got an email that said I didn't like, the word ceased and the word seized. He said I say them too similarly, and I need to stop that. So I feel like I say them different enough for you to differentiate what you get what I'm saying, but apparently not for one person. See, stuff like that isn't very constructive. At least I don't think so. But it has stuck in my mind, so maybe it was constructive, because now I think about it when I see those two words to read. But anyway, I'm really excited to come back next week with the Willows. Again, it's going to be kind of a long episode, which is, those are fun to do every once in a while. I haven't done one in a while. I mean, I did the Poe one, but that was more of a compilation. But doing an extra long story, I've been wanting to do the Willows for so long, but admittedly, I will pull it up and then remember how long the Willows is and be like, maybe next week, maybe another time. And I've been doing that for this particular story for years, probably since the show started and I started doing classic literature. I've been putting it off because it's intimidating when it comes to narration anyway. But this time I'm going to break it up into quarters, as I've already got part of it done. And I really want to spend a lot of time on the immersive sounds. For those who aren't familiar with the story, I'm not going to spoil it, but it takes place in a very swampy, willowy area. So I want you to feel like you're kind of in this, outdoorsy area next to this water. And it's a fantastic story. It's one of the most famous classic horror stories. I believe even Lovecraft once said that he really enjoyed it, and I don't really read Lovecraft on my show, so here's a story that he liked, There you go. That's a fun compromise. I think that's all for this week. Oh, I went hiking this week. I didn't bake this week, sorry, but I did go hiking. I went on a really intensive hike. It's actually considered a hard hike on all trails, so I was pretty proud of myself. My friend Kara and I went hiking. If that's another thing, if you want to follow me on social media, on Instagram, I posted all those pictures. My butt is in one, so if you don't want to see my butt, then don't go look. But it's not like just a picture. It's kind of, it's a little, you'll see, or you won't if you don't want to. But I'm just warning you. I don't want to send you over and be like, jump scare. Shelby butt. So there you go. You've been warned. But it's on Instagram. But there's lots of pictures of us hiking, and it was so much fun to be out in nature, to go to some hot springs and just be in nature and work really hard. I love just pushing my body to limits, and oh boy, it was a difficult hike. There's part of it that is you go I think it's 1,000-foot elevation during the hike, and the way to the hot springs is a lot of it's downhill. And then on the way back, it's basically like being on a stair climber for an hour, because it is straight up. This particular trail, you definitely need the proper shoes, otherwise you will fall on your butt. I used to work in the shoe industry. I managed a Skechers, or assistant managed a Skechers. But my friend Kara also, I'm not going to dox her, but she works near the shoe industry as well. And we both spotted that someone in Vans, Vans have a pretty particular pattern on the bottom. We could see someone in Vans had started the trail in the dust, and then they had turned around, because you cannot do this hike in improper footwear. And that's your lesson for the week, kids. Wear proper footwear. But I'm really excited about getting back into hiking. It was something I did a long, long ago, and then reasons I stopped, because for reasons I'm not going to get into on the show. But I'm free now, and I'm going to start hiking again. And it was just really great. It was so funny, though, because where she lives, it started snowing the day after. And where I live, it started raining the day after. And it was like, can you believe we were basically like half naked, mostly naked, out in the wilderness in the desert, just free as a bird. And then the very next day, it's just like, we're like huddled up and it's freezing. And it was just a really funny juxtaposition of 2 days of my week this week, where it's like it's like I lived completely different lives in the first half of the week and the second half of the week. Anyway, I'm super just rambling now. Okay, I'm going to go, and you're going to go, and we're going to go. And you need to remember to drink your water. And now that it's getting, wear your sunscreen. I wore my sunscreen Tuesday, and I did not burn. So sunscreen is important. Wear your sunscreen. Go get some sleep. Sweet dreams.